Is the artist a special person who lives and works according to his own laws, or is he the product of his society, of his class? Is he a precursor who already personifies the independent man, or is he a prisoner of his private imagination and restraints? Is he a court jester, advisor, prophet, or is he a failure, someone who can't adapt? Can we do without him, or is he necessary? Should he conceive an ideal world, or should he challenge everything, including himself? Are the artist's experiences deeper, more intense than those of an ordinary man? Can he take the essence of his fears and hopes and make them visible? Are these also our fears and hopes? Does the artist change the world? Does he change it through his art or through his politics? Is he political because he's an artist? Does he actually have a mission for society? Or is he only a seismograph, registering the so-called zeitgeist? 1949 brings a new intensification of international political antagonism. Social restlessness is increasing everywhere. The consequences are strikes, labor troubles, the war of liberation in Indochina, the Mau Mau movement in Kenya, the McCarthy era in the United States. At the same time, the first hydrogen bomb is being tested. The war of liberation in Algeria is accompanied by the formation of CETO and by the conclusion of the Warsaw Treaty. While at Geneva, the great powers are meeting for the summit conference, the Bandung Conference includes nearly all the underdeveloped nations and forms a new concept, the Third World. The conflict between capitalism and socialism continues in the form of the Cold War. The Soviet Union launches the first artificial satellite, Sputnik 1. The revolution in Cuba gives the American hemisphere a new face. 16 African states receive their independence. The end of the Fourth Republic in France, the building of the Berlin Wall, and the troubles in the Congo alternate with each other, while Yuri Gagarin is in orbit around the world. The Vietnam War begins with the Tonkin affair, and there's conflict between India and Pakistan. The period which follows is characterized by even more unrest, the massacre of innumerable communists in Indonesia, the Cultural Revolution in China, racial unrest in the United States, the Nigerian Civil War, the coup d'etat in Greece, and the 6 Days War in the Middle East. Revolts and rebellions all over the world, the student barricades in Paris, strikes in France, guerrillas fighting underground, partisans hijacking airplanes. In Northern Ireland, civil war. Prague survives the intervention of the Warsaw Pact armies, students in revolt everywhere. The Vietnam War extends to all of Indochina. While on the moon, the American Neil Armstrong takes his great step for mankind. Man becomes more and more a prisoner of technical progress. Mankind as such is endangered by the new technology of industrialization. Our society of prosperity becomes a society of distress. Rationalism and irrationalism alternate hectically with each other. There's a tendency to regress to ancient religions and philosophies aimed at individual salvation. The present world is characterized by fear of the future. The nuclear armaments race, political revolutions, hungry peoples, social unrest, brutality in and out of war, the rebirth of fascism. Everything is in turmoil. Economy and politics, science and technique, philosophy and art. Nobody remains outside this situation. Here in Chur, capital of the canton of Grisons and Episcopal See, the painter Hans Rudolf Giger was born in 1940. His parents own a chemist's shop in the oldest part of the city. Hans Rudolf Giger's childhood was a sheltered one, interspersed with soft, secret fears. Since 1961, he has lived in Zurich. 1963, he draws a series of Atomic Children, against the atomic menace, as he says, and publishes it. People are shocked and taken aback.
But it is not final.
Well, atomic weapons are very spectacular and powerful weapons, but they're not final weapons destroying everything. It's a new way to make war. But the soldier trained in atomic war will live and fight and live, as soldiers have done for centuries.
Gamma and neutron rays acting upon us in a nuclear war would definitely change our hereditary factors. A mutation is a spasmodic and unexpected change of the hereditary factors, which produces a phenotype diverging from the parents. Such changes are passed on over generations through the genes. Mutations develop spontaneously or can be produced in great numbers by the researcher using chemistry and physical sciences. Here we see the natural form of the Drosophila fruit fly. Among the polycellular insects, this is the genetically best examined one. It has a pair of long, elegant wings, 2 big dark red eyes, 2 ear-shaped feelers, and long, slender bristles. Relatively harmless mutations are known to have come from this fruit fly. For instance, the bristles can become a sort of curly hair. Also, pigments in the eyes can be changed or missing completely. However, mutations also can take more dramatic forms. Here, for instance, where the results are wingless animals. Or instead of the normal feelers, an additional pair of legs can develop on the head. Or sprout from the eyes, or bits of wings sometimes grow from where the eyes normally would be. It is thinkable that the process that created such monstrosities, which is what they are, could also be possible in man. Very early, I was filled with enthusiasm for the fantastic and the mysterious. As a child, for example, I was very impressed with the fairy tale of the one who set out to learn how to fear. Somehow I was fascinated by the illustrations, and at the same time I was afraid of them. I would turn the pages very quickly because I was afraid I would dream of what I had seen.
Okay.
I used to have a series of dreams which happened at a place very familiar to me, my parents' house. There was a window in the staircase which did not lead to the street, but to the adjoining house. This window was always shut and closed with curtains on the other side. In my dreams, I used to go to the staircase, the window would be open, and I would look into a room which was illuminated by a yellowish-violet light. There were huge walls without ceilings and without floors, and along the walls wooden stairs which were endless as they descended into the depths. I have never been able to find out where these walls led to. Perhaps I had imagined that in these rooms a certain kind of people would be staying, and that they would not be people like you and me. So I created a special type of people who might be living in these rooms.
Wir Psychotherapeuten, die wir so viel mit Träumen zu tun haben und wissen, dass der Mensch das, was nicht ertragen kann, verdrängt und das weiter.
We psychotherapists, having so much to do with dreams, know that man will repress what he cannot bear, which, somewhere in his unconscious world, that is to say, beyond his conscious id, continues to live, and which, under certain circumstances, for example, during the night, can creep up again. We understand that a man who is an artist can be harassed by these images, not only during the night while he is sleeping, but also in the daytime. When he begins to express them, they cease to threaten him as inner demons. Rather, he is confronted with them. He can shape and form them, and thus they lose some of their threatening brutality, which is so frequently seen.
Another scene where my dreams used to take place later on was the cellar of the house where I grew up. Winding stairs go down. In olden times, the city of Chur was connected with the episcopal castle by a subterranean passage, and this passage went through our cellar. Now it's walled up, although it continues into the neighboring house, where it's also walled up, and I was told that it was partly filled in. When I went down these stairs in my dreams, all the doors were open, and I came to a realm where I did not really know my way about. And frightened, I ran back again. Frequently, I also visited the castles and palaces in the surrounding area. The dungeons and the torture chambers especially filled me with fear. The old musty smell and the dim light in these cells heightened this weird atmosphere. At one time, I attended the Marienheim Catholic kindergarten at Chur, which was run by an elderly nun. In her desk, she kept a series of pictures of Christ, which showed him suffering at various points in his life, from the thorn-crowned head with just a few drops of blood in the forehead, to the face all covered with blood. Depending on how disobedient we had been, she used to show us one or the other of the pictures, thus creating the impression that his blood was flowing according to the suffering we had caused him.
Ich glaube, dass Gige ein gutes Quantum Spott.
I believe that Giger has a good amount of irony and humor, and that this is expressed in his pictures.
I've transferred Darwin's theory of evolution, that the species develop by adaptation and selection, to the situation of the man of today. That is, if we want to survive, we have to adapt ourselves to an ever more mechanized world, and at the same time we have to protect ourselves from an environment which has been thrown off its biological balance. This is how the humanoids, and later on the biomechanoids, were created. Pictures which are trying to attain a synthesis of organic and technical elements. To many people, my pictures give the impression of sickness, but sicknesses also can be a healthy reaction to sick conditions.
Ignition. Liftoff. Liftoff. And 30 minutes after the hour.
What we see as white is the surface, the dark background, the black space.
Auch bestätigt den puderartigen Zustand der Oberfläche.
He confirms the powdery condition of the surface. Apparently there are some colors after all. He just spoke of some purple rock pieces which he'd found. Now the picture's standing on its head. I believe we have to point it out again.
Nun ist es wieder richtig.
Now it's all right again.
Deutlich zu erkennen der Horizont noch einmal.
Take note of the horizon once more. What is white in the lower half of the picture is the surface.
Schwarz der Weltraum.
Black, space. Probably it's connected with the LEM by a cable from where it receives its electric energy. Let's remind you again, contrasts are incomparably harder than on Earth. Here on Earth, we can't see such contrasts.
Sei vorsichtig, sagt der
Be
eine.
careful, one's telling the other. Try to lean somewhat in the direction in which you want to walk. That means forwards, or else you might fall backwards. To be careful when walking is even more necessary than on Earth, because a ruined spacesuit from which the air is escaping would, of course, lead to catastrophe.
Out of the inseparable connection of man and machine, the biomechanoids came into being. And this happened, I believe, for the first time when I invented the birth-giving machine. Men made to measure are a real possibility in the future. It should be possible to produce a specific type in great numbers and to breed this type. This apparently would be the next phase. Here, too, science and technology have kept up with imagination. Therefore, it's possible today to produce a great number of a given type of frog, animals with absolutely equal hereditary factors. Men produced in series would respond to predetermined environmental conditions with predictable stereotyped reactions. According to requirements they would be created to meet, as soldiers, production line workers, or as obedient party officials.
Was braucht es heute dazu, damit man Wirklichkeit...
What does it take today to be able to express reality as an artist? It's not sufficient simply to show the conditions which form the basis of Giger's work, as we see them, for example, on the TV screen and in the press.
Auf dem Fernsehschirm und in der Presse begehen.
Unter keinen Umständen darfst du deine Stellung verlassen, es sei denn, es werde dir befohlen. Denn ohne es zu wissen, wasche aber die Büchsen ab, bevor du sie öffnest.
Euer Haus, Frau Berger.
Und er drehte sich kein einziges Mal um.
Afterwards, I can always explain the pictures somehow. For example, in The Violation of the Brain. People completely influenced by mass media and education are made blind and defenseless. This makes them malleable. All that always fascinates and at the same time frightens me.
Diese Gesetze im weitesten Sinne genommen heißen Wachstum mit Fortpflanzung, Vererbung, die eigentlich schon in der Fortpflanzung enthalten.
These laws, taken in the largest sense, being growth with reproduction, inheritance, which is almost implied by reproduction, variability from the indirect and direct action of the external conditions of life, and from use and disuse. Thus, from the war of nature, from famine and death, the most exalted object which we are capable of conceiving, namely the production of the higher animals, directly follows. There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers, having been originally breathed by the Creator into a few forms or into one, and that, whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved.
In 1924, The Trauma of Birth, a revolutionary and controversial book written by Freud's pupil Otto Rank, was published in Vienna. According to Rank's view, human life after birth is permanently and unconsciously influenced in its whole behavior and in its determination by the trauma of birth. Freud, who to a great extent was not in favor of Rank's idea, wrote, "Only later did I come to appreciate the importance of the imagination and unconscious thoughts on the life in the womb. They contain the explanation of the peculiar fear so many people have of being buried alive, as well as the profound and unconscious reason for the belief that there is life after death, which only represents the projection into the future of this weird life before birth. Being born, by the way, is the first experience of fear, and as such the source and prototype of the fear emotion." Several times I visited the Tamina Gorge with my mother. At that time, narrow, slippery paths were still leading along the crazy walls of rock into the interior of the gorge up to the small place. From there, one could advance through a tunnel to the warm mineral spring. The whole atmosphere fascinated me as a child, and I always liked to go there. We are a people who are mainly rustic in character in spite of industry, international trade relations, the power of the banks, and the depopulation of the rural areas. In our history, the countryside plays a more important part than cities. It still does today, particularly in our thinking and feeling. Paul Nizon. Mostly I remember the craziest things when I'm alone, lying on the bed and listening to records. Then for hours, waves of associations roll over me. Immediately afterwards, I must try to put these things out of my mind. When I start to work, it's a moment of torment because I'm afraid I won't be able to come close to my ideas. But the procedure is different. Sometimes I work without seeing any results.
Einst ein Schiff bestieg und in die neue Welt gefahren.
Wie viel des Geldes hat er denn gefunden?
Im Werte von 1200 Zechinen.
1200 Zechinen? Das sind 6.456 $, 2.000.
There are also other situations which inspire me. For example, if I'm going to the theater and the play bores me, my thoughts begin to wander. In this way, I have often lived through the craziest fantasies. This happens not because the production is good, but because my mind has made up for the shortcomings of the play.
Aber die Studie ist mir wichtiger als der Wahnsinn. Nichts leichter, als von einem Augenblick auf den anderen wahnsinnig und einer solchen ungeheuren Belastung enthoben zu sein. Plötzlich wahnsinnig zu sein, ohne vorher verrückt zu sein.
But the study is more important to me than madness. Nothing easier than to become mad from one moment to the next and to be released from such enormous stress. To be mad suddenly, without being mad before. To be mad immediately. But as long as he had not written down the study was useless. Every day he told his wife how useless the study was if he only had it in his head and not on paper. She always said, why didn't he ever write it down? For years she always said the same thing in the same way, because she still hadn't realized that one can have a sketch in one's head a long time without being able to put it on paper. The difficulty is not in having something in one's head. Everyone has the most monstrous things in his head, but the difficulty is to bring this monstrosity out of the head and onto paper. One can have anything in one's head, and as a matter of fact, everybody has everything in his head, but few can put something down on paper. While all men have the most monstrous things in their heads, on paper one only finds the most miserable, most ridiculous, and most wretched forms.
I frequently spent rainy Sunday mornings at the Historical Museum. What particularly captivated me were the Egyptian mummies and sarcophaguses. On the whole, I was mostly impressed by the old Egyptian culture. At that time, I transformed my room into a pharaonic tomb.
First, I find that the Hallelujah is a concrete representation. There are figures and objects, head and breast part of a woman on the right hand, the same fragments of the human figure, but no longer definable as male or female, on the left hand. These fragments are combined with testicle-type double forms from which emerge hanging cords. And next to these organic forms, inorganic forms can be seen, metal objects as the cut-open shell on the right hand, the machinery in the background, U-shaped stirrups and loops. It is significant that from these absolutely plastically modeled objects, in their reality exactly defined, the naturalistic realism disappears. The head of the woman on the right hand is crowned or crushed by the testicle thing, but this thing receives, through eye-type holes and slinging arms, the individual existence of an octopus-like demonic being. The testicle pairs also mutate into bottom forms with hints of thigh bones. Particularly the mixing up of face and breast parts with abdominal parts is completely irrealistic. The same happens in the machine parts of the picture. In the midst of all the screws, tubes, hoses, and clamps, a skull form appears on the upper left-hand corner. The cut-open metal shell on the right hand is reformed into the frame or case of the figures. In short, it is a conscious and totally illogical use of the world of realistic objects.
Was mich an der gegenständlichen Thematik stört, ist die Anleihe bei vermeintlichen Tabus.
What bothers me with the graphic theme is the use of pretended taboos, nipples, vaginas, testicles, anus and urinary openings, innards. Who still considers these to be taboos today?
If I say it's a composition in blue, in which the vertical line dominates, I've said very little.
Wenn ich aber die Begriffe Architektur, monumental gebrauche oder auch nur von Raum spreche, habe ich dann beschrieben, analysiert oder interpretiert. Es kommt mir vor,
But if I use the architectural or monumental concepts, or if I only speak of space, then I've described, analyzed, or interpreted this work. It seems to me like the lower part of a huge front gate, which is closing, or is it opening? In any case, the inclination of the two walls or doors gives me the feeling of movement, even, as I've said, if I cannot make up my mind as to whether the movement is going away from me or if it's coming towards me. In any case, the situation seems so paramount that in front of this gate one is forced to become passive. And what does the luminescence and the dark mean? Is it the ghostly hour? Is it a physical phenomenon? Is it the moon? Or is it a fluorescent light burning? If it were not for the U-shaped stirrup, it could be an old Egyptian tomb or some other very old architecture. But this form is based on modern technique. This contrast is so weird, as if one were shut into the classicist temple of a large bank, which is under electric high voltage and a deadly alarm system. But there's still the hole. On this side of the many walls, something is shining. On the other side, it's dark. There is always more to a picture than one can know. Allegation. Simply to spend my vacations in a beautiful place is quite impossible for me. I get bored. Perhaps I could stand it in a place where extraordinary conditions prevail. I must combine any trip with a purpose, even if it's only to see a certain picture in a museum. That all of a sudden I made these wet cells is the result of an inner experience I had. The toilet bowl, the sink, and the bathtub also are kinds of passages. The drainage holes are connected to a widespread network of tubes, just like the entrances to the underworld. It pains me to wash an insect down the drain. I see how it disappears. I visualize the sewage system from which there is no escape. Then the insect, choking and drowning. All this calls up a ghastly chain of associations. I must draw and paint. This gives me satisfaction and a vital interest, but at the same time, drawing and painting oppress me. I must work, but to always do something depresses me too. If I have not done any work for 2 or 3 days, I have a bad conscience, or I see my very existence jeopardized.
so auf dieser Fläche, die du jetzt hier hast?
Ja, ich sehe da gar nicht, was ich soll machen.
Ja, BIM muss man mal auch ein bisschen studieren, wenn man das Bild kommt, wo es noch Platz hat. Ja.
Die Frage ist,
du könntest vielleicht, dass das Ganze wie ein Nest ist oder so. Weißt?
Ja, einfach ein Band so durchziehen, da raus und einen raus irgendwie.
Ja, oder dass es, weißt, so, die Bewegung so.
Ja.
Wenn das Ganze zwischen ins Wasser reinrühren, dass es entgegenspritzt drin. Ja, das ist vielleicht zu simpel, weiß auch nicht. Oder dass ein Gegenangriff startet, ist nicht. Wo die da verteidigen, dass da aus den Ecken raus oder so etwas kommt. Das, so regelmäßig wie das wird es sowieso nicht. Ja.
Also, denke mir, sollte zum Teil können, sogar fast. Meinst du jetzt zum Beispiel wie der Arm hier, nicht, dass ich dort unten reinfahren
Ja,
nicht?
das habe ich gedacht. Und dort zum Beispiel rein.
Ich muss mal genau abgrenzen, was da noch Material ist und was man Spuren
genau.
sieht.
Ja,
nicht?
genau.
Ja, miteinander.
Weißt,
Weiss wäre, glaube ich, nicht so günstig, nur weiss lassen.
Weißt du, was wahrscheinlich auch noch schön wäre? Nicht, wenn er mit Silber und Gold eventuell Osttüren arbeiten könnte. Was meinst du?
Also ich kitschig.
Je nachdem, nicht wenn...
Nicht kitschig?
Ja, vielleicht, weil kommt auf die Form drauf an.
Aber es kommt darauf an,
was es ist.
Ja, genau. Ja.
Vielleicht musst du da noch ziemlich strenge Formen machen zu dem wilden Knäuel her. Weißt du, also, weniger so strichhaft, sondern körperhaft. Weil das da sind schon fast Linien und so.
Das ist wahnsinnig, so ein Speer hier von innen raus, weißt du.
Ich habe von diesem Ecken oben ein Speer reinzuschießen. Weißt du, dass er so rauskommt? Und so
aber wenn du drückst,
ja.
mehr als einen Angriff gibt es dann.
Ja, das habe ich gestern am Abend schon.
So einer, der mit ins Herz trifft.
Und das so richtig, dann könntest du so die schon stellen, schön raus.
Im Prinzip, wenn du denen so etwas hast, wo so rein, zack.
Ja, aber mehr Speer noch. So einer dort, so ein Symbol.
Das ist ein schöner, symbolischer
ein schöner, ja.
Ein kosmischer.
Aha. Ah. Ja, das könnte, klar.
Ja, es wird schon ein paar entfremden, oder? Das hat überhaupt nichts zu suchen da drin.
Aber die Frage ist, von wo her und wo rein das dann
Du, ich glaube, ich würde von allen Seiten, die sind eingekreist, die tun sich auch gegen alle Seiten raus verteidigen oder wollen absäckeln da und werden sind aber wieder gekettet und so.
In dem Moment könntest du wahrscheinlich Silber und Gold einsetzen, aber ich habe das Gefühl, dass Silber und Gold zu dem hier ganz verrückt ist.
Ja, das könnte zum Beispiel anmalen.
Silberig, ja.
So, und dann könntest du am Rand noch ein bisschen, weißt du, dass er rund wird, stehen.
Ja.
Könntest du so ein bisschen höher, mit weiss.
Also ein, hä?
Ja, ja.
Ja. Gut, ja. Ja, warum nicht?
Und irgendwie könnt ihr ein Band drumherum machen. Mit kleineren Figürchen, die alle da drauf schauen.
Ja.
Weißt du, so, die drumherum
ja, Zuschauer, die Arena, klar, wenn die
so
fertig gemacht werden. Ja, das wäre noch schön. So wie Kegel hintereinander. So.
Ja.
Aber weißt
du... Erste Reihe, zweite.
Ja.
Du würdest du die machen, wo so...
Bist du draussen gewesen? Nein. Wir sind am schauen, wenn wir da weitermachen. Das kommt schon
aber eben,
langsam.
wenn die Arena ringsum kommt, dann kommt es aber gleich schon wieder auf das Tortenhaft-Zeugs raus.
Ja du, warum nicht einen Kuchen? Ein Kuchen
ja, ist ja schon ein Geburtstagskuchen da.
Ah, weißt du denn?
Ja, weißt du, Zuschauer irgendwie ringsum. Und er will reinstecken. Scheibe gross. 4,20 Meter mal 2,40 Meter. Wenn alles fixiert werden, dass die Kohle nicht wegkommt und so. Das machen wir jetzt alles. Keine Ahnung, wir stellen es mal einmal zu aus oder so, aber was mit passiert haben.
Alle 4 Wochen jetzt das mit so rund ist.
Ja, so einen Raum wenn wir machen als mit denen. Aber ja, ich habe selber schon einen Raum in dieser Größe gemacht. Das ist bei mir daheim, einfach in der Stube. Und jetzt mit dem, ich weiss nicht, so eine Ausstellung oder so gerne. Wir stellen da mal so aus, manchmal zusammen und manchmal so.
Awakening is usually a bitter thing, especially when one tries hard to get back to an erotic dream which is not over. But this seldom succeeds. Everyone dreams, more or less, but few people trust themselves to relate or present their dreams, as they are inhibited from making public their perverse thoughts. Now concerning my skin landscapes. These are my protest against the systematic poisoning of our environment. A sick landscape marks men, and my landscapes are nothing other than the transplanting of the human skin on our surroundings. What led me to paint these repulsive children's heads which frighten all women? What scares me most is overpopulation, with all its horrifying side effects, such as epidemics, mass hysteria, famine, and total environment destruction. For me, the greatest criminals against mankind are those who, with the help of religion or false ethics, forbid the pill, prevent abortions, and hinder old people from dying a redeeming death. This is Bijan Alam. He lives in Paris and owns several of my paintings. He himself can best explain why he likes and collects my work.
Ja, mit ihnen leben und gern haben, das ist so eine Sache. Man kann dem Sujet seine Bilder gar nicht auf den ersten Blick gern haben. Ich habe es auch nicht im ersten Moment gern gehabt. Aber es hat eine gewisse Wahrheit in mir gesprochen.
It's a strange thing to live with these pictures and like them. One can't be attracted to these images of Giger at first sight. But the first time I saw them, they corresponded to a certain truth. And I couldn't do anything but buy these pictures with all the means at my disposal in order to live with them. I remember very well how shocked my parents were when they saw these paintings on my walls. But these pictures are not only a psychograph of the artist, they also have a secret, hidden beauty to which I am sensitive.
Sie haben in sich eine ganz verborgene geheime Schönheit, deren ich einfach empfindlich bin. Und wenn man mit seinen Bildern lebt, merkt man, dass sie über das hinweggehen, als sie offensichtlich darstellen sollten für die anderen.
This is Sonia Koblet. She owns a very beautiful painting of mine.
Ich habe das Bild gekauft, weil ich schon von Kind her eine Vorliebe für Surrealisten.
I bought this picture because even as a child I prefer surrealists, and I have followed Giger's career for a long time. I am fascinated by his technique. This painting differs from his varied variations on penis and vagina. This picture shows a beautiful, engaging woman whose effect is very aesthetic, although she is surrounded by death and rather negative elements. This does not bother me at all. There are, of course, the reactions of my friends who look into my bedroom and say, "How can you live with a picture like that?" Well, first of all, I sleep under this picture, and secondly, this altercation between life and death creates no problem for me, because in this painting, life stands in the foreground, and it is a very attractive life indeed. There, perhaps, I draw a parallel, in all modesty, to my own life, where the aesthetic is always in the foreground.
Mit meinem eigenen, wo auch immer das Ästhetische im Vordergrund ist.
Wir haben das Bild also gekauft, weil es uns fasziniert hat, obwohl viele Leute gemeint haben, wir hätten es gekauft.
We bought this picture because it fascinated us, and not, as so many people claim, in order to provoke them. This picture expresses everything for me which a woman can feel for a child: birth, contraception, overpopulation, infection and plague. In any case, we now have no problem finding topics of conversation with people who visit us. They come in and are horrified. In any event, one can do something against the abscesses and blood of the children in Mr. Giger's paintings.
Herr Giger, wo man nur Eiterbühle sieht und ganzes fest starkes Rot. Lieber eitrige Kind, weil da kann man etwas dagegen tun.
Du hast so.
So, jetzt sieht wieder friedlich.
That was the Hugler family. I live here outside Zurich in a small row house which belongs to me. My studio is in it, and I lead rather a secluded life with the exception of visitors, girlfriends, and so on. I like to live alone. I work best that way. I do not like it at all when fans or other interested people come just to see how it looks where I live. Weapons have always fascinated me. I have a whole collection of them, particularly handguns. I loaded my own ammunition, molded the bullets, and repaired and altered the pistols and revolvers myself. This went on till I did my military service, and there they spoiled it all for me and took all the pleasure out of shooting. Now, in my paintings, revolvers, pistols, and knives seem to demonstrate the aggressive character of my monsters. How will man come to grips with technology? That is why I created my biomechanoids. These are men and monsters who are raped by technology and become robots. What especially interests me is the formation of the various artificial limbs. In my paintings, a harmonious fusion of man, technology, and architecture takes place. To our boring drawing board architecture, I oppose an elegant symbiosis, which is composed of pipes, cables, muscle, bones, and parts of plants, and thus it is an expression of our time.
Really, there's not the slightest doubt that Giger's paintings depict a morbid, exhausted, decayed world. But Giger, therefore, need not be decadent. That his pictures could turn out that way has more to do with the way our world is today.
That was Roland Greitler, the photographer who photographs my work. This is Jörg Stummer of the Gallery Stummer in Hupschmied, where I expose my work in Zurich.
In conversation with visitors to my gallery, I experience time and again that people ask me what kind of a person Giger actually is. Is he raving, or what is the matter with him? He should go to a psychiatrist. But this is naturally quite wrong, because H.R. Giger is completely normal and paints his pictures with great engagement, an unbelievable fantasy. At home we have many paintings by many different artists, and when I ask Evely, who painted this picture, she says, see, that's by Giger.
This is Sergius Golovin, writer and researcher of myths.
Etwas ist auffallend, wenn man heute viel Gelegenheit hat, in Landkommunen zu gehen oder in Wohngemeinschaften.
When one has many opportunities to visit country communes in which young people are trying to develop a new lifestyle, one is struck by how often Giger's posters are to be seen on the walls. These people don't even know who the posters by. The only explanation is that these images express something which is in us all today, something archetypical and primal that we long for or are frightened of.
Bildhafte Vorstellungen aus, sie drücken Sachen aus, nach denen wir uns alle sehnen oder von denen wir alle Angst haben.
I repeatedly think when I show these pictures to my mother and father, they will be frightened to death. It's odd that I always ask, in spite of my freedom, what do my parents think of me when I paint pictures like this? But as I am their child, it is actually quite natural. What I do must come from somewhere.
Das ist ein Vater, der überhaupt keinen Begriff habe, was Kunst sei, sondern ein Künstler da zu Weg gebracht habe, nicht? Ja. Das in dem Sinn. Und woher die Fantasie?
That a father who has no idea what art is could produce such an artist. And where indeed does he get this fantasy? From the mother, of course. The mother has such a talent for fantasy, and so nervous she sees ghosts and such things. Or perhaps not yet. Of course, this fantasy is connected with an overdose of hormones at the time of nursing, in infancy. When they started testing these products, it didn't come from mother's milk alone.
Beruht effektiv auf einer Überdosierung von Hormonen im Säuglingsalter, nicht wahr? Wo man die Sache erst ausprobiert hat, nicht? Und von der Muttermilch allein kommt es nicht.
Nein, also
aber ja.
Sometimes, when I look at my paintings, I ask myself, what led me to such things? For example, these strapped-in children who have to play Indians. Children often have to play roles, probably because their parents wanted it that way. Duress of this kind in youth follows you into old age. I still remember very well how my mother packed me up in a kind of overall, which closed with a lot of buttons or a zipper at the back. This caused difficulties when I had to go to the toilet. I despaired when I realized I could not shit and piss at the same time because the construction of my suit only allowed one of these activities at a time. So I had to squeeze both of them in and wait until evening when I was freed of my straitjacket. Among the elements which repeatedly appear in my paintings, it is above all the worms and the snakes which horrify me most. And I think to find a worm in excrement or vomit is the most horrifying thing I can imagine. In my pictures, worms take the form of technical elements such as tubes and hoses, and that reminds me of this. Once at Easter, I had to look after my grandmother's grave together with my mother. When turning over the earth, a thick worm crawled out, and I thought, my God, that's part of my grandmother. I let the spade fall and ran out of the graveyard. My pictures exhibit a color scale of white, brown, gray. Actually, a very unhealthy, gloomy, pale world. An inner world in which the colors have rotting innards, sprouting potatoes, and decaying corpses. On the other hand, I love nature very much, the sun, the woods, and the mountains. Earlier on, I had a lot to do with architecture, but dropped it when I realized how little freedom you have. Then I went over to interior architecture, to industrial design, but gave that up too, because you have to adapt yourself to human proportions. So I began to paint my architecture and inventions, and today I get it off on a two-dimensional surface. Vernissages in the galleries are a big occasion for the artist. At last, he has the opportunity to show his work. He hopes a lot of people will come and admire it. The people come, drink the wine, glance at the pictures now and again for politeness' sake. People meet and want to be seen. For me, these events are always a little depressing. I pour out my entire inner life for them, vomit myself empty, and what do I get out of it? At the most, a look at a few beautiful women. That is the only thing which interests me on such occasions. That's why I prefer to exhibit with other artists, where everyone shows 2 or 3 pieces. Then you are not forced to admire your own work.
These were a few scenes from the science fiction horror movie Alien, produced by 20th Century Fox and filmed at the Shepperton Studios in England. Our documentary is going to show you some of my work behind the scenes. I was responsible for all the fantasy scenery in the movie and had to design the unknown planet, the wreck of the alien spaceship and its interior, and also the so-called egg silo and the different types of alien monsters. I made the first sketches and designs for the movie in my studio in Zurich after the first discussions of the project with the director, Ridley Scott. I flew to England several times where my paintings were appraised and we discussed possible alterations. These are a few variations of the alien figure I had in mind. They all emerged out of my personal visual world, which I call biomechanical. The egg silo, an unrealized project. The landscape of the unknown planet. The alien spaceship, derelict. Details and structure of the derelict. Entrance of the derelict. Passage in the derelict. Cockpit with the remains of the unknown being who was her pilot. The pilot's seat and the pilot in detail. Shaft with a membrane. The interior of the egg silo. Model of the egg silo. At Bray Studios, a group of specialists are making the models we needed for the special effects scenes. My colleague, P. Voise, will explain in a moment how these models are made and finally used in the movie.
The advantage of using plasticine is we can bed pieces of plastic pipe into the plasticine and it holds quite well. Areas like this we use pieces of plastic tube, cut it, fit it in, fix it with polymer with nails or pins and then dress up to it with plasticine. This is being painted at the moment somewhere, so it'll be finished off later. The more areas in here, we can cut into the polystyrene, we can cut through. This part of the alien spacecraft is an area. that was made full size on a large stage at Shepperton Studios. The total height is about 12, 13 metres high, from here to here. You get some idea of the scale. That little figure there is approximately the right scale. The landscape was built at Shepperton Studios, some of it anyway, it comes back as far as here. A lot more will be built on the stage here in model form, which will cover a large area.
Now we're inside Shepperton Studios, where movies like The Omen, Superman, and parts of Star Wars were filmed. Science fiction scenery is usually set up in huge studios called stages. Here, the models are built in their original size for the shooting of the scenes, corresponding exactly to the previous design. The basic construction of the scenery begins with steel tubes and wood. Then the supports are covered with wire netting and finally with sacking soaked in plaster. To work out the final structure, we spread a mixture of dyed plaster and a gritty substance over the finished shapes with a mason's trowel. The more complex shapes are cut out of foam rubber and glued on. The general feeling here is really good, and it's agreeable to work with these people. The tubes, only vaguely defined in the design, have to be integrated into the landscape and painted to fit in. Through the use of different smoke and water effects, the final decor achieves a really mystic atmosphere and is presented as follows. The pilot in the cockpit. Using my design, P. Voisey and I sculpt the pilot in his seat, out of clay. Every detail is important, because it has to show up well in the final mold. The next step is the job for the plaster casting team, who have to make a mold from this figure. They're really working with terrific energy. To stabilize the forms, they insert strips of plaster-soaked sacking. The hardened molds have to be carefully removed and all clay residue cleaned off to guarantee a perfect resin casting. The remaining constructions are also built with wood, plaster, and foam rubber. This man is carving out these technical-looking trimmings with a lot of patience and skill. To create a homogeneous effect of the sculpture, I'm painting parts of it with a transparent sepia color. We have to use a crane attached to the ceiling to place the pilot, which was built separately, into the right position. The work has now progressed so far that it needs only a few cosmetic touch-ups to be ready for shooting time tomorrow. The egg, or rather eggs, we used about 120 of them for this set, are the organic repositories of the aliens in their first form of appearance, the so-called facehugger. In the workshop, probably I had just started during a proverbial tea break. The pieces of ground on which all the eggs stand singly are in the making. The professionals are watching my work with interest. Probably the realization of a design like mine is new to them. The original idea for the egg's opening was a kind of mobile elastic slit, but the production felt that this was too directly reminiscent of female sex organs and worried about possible censoring in Catholic countries. So we settled on a similar but crosswise shape, which satisfied both the Catholic countries and my own sense of forms. The facehugger. The design for the small alien monster named the facehugger is lying in wait inside the egg to be awakened out of its beauty sleep by the slightest touch of the astronaut's hand. It flings itself onto its victim, eating its way through the helmet and settles on the man's face, forcing its long snout down into the helpless victim's throat in order to deposit its horrible seed. The cosmic incubation has begun. Having been a professional industrial designer, it means a lot to me to have a design show its symbolism as well as its functional aspect clearly. Therefore, I endowed the facehugger with the spring-like tail he uses to propel himself out of the egg, also with 8 long-jointed fingers and 2 pulsing testicle-like appendages for the spores. The delicate mechanism of the fingers is moved by invisible strings, and the pulsing comes from a small air pump. Interview with director Ridley Scott.
When was the first time you saw Giger's work?
Well, I'd never come across Giger's work at all. I'd been vaguely aware, once I'd seen it, of some artwork I'd seen earlier for a record sleeve, I think. Brain Salad Surgery, right? And it wasn't until I got to Los Angeles, and I then knew I was going to be involved in the film. The thing about all these films, all monster films, or whatever you'd like to call it, is that the danger is how on earth are you going to finally do it? How are you going to make it, okay? And so that was one of the big concerns about how on earth it was going to be carried out, who was going to actually design it or create it. And I was shown the book, Necronomicon, okay, in Los Angeles, in fact by O'Bannon, who brought it in, and I nearly fell off the desk, said, that's it, and why look farther? And so that's how I saw it. It was as simple as that. I've never been so certain about anything in my life.
And what impressed you most about his work?
Again, it's one of those things where I think there are a lot of, say, artists in this area and of surrealism or whatever you like to call it. And I think Giger has an extra quality of, I think one of the most frightening things of all is a quality of reality combined with a sort of his own form of fantasy. And I think that's what makes it stronger, is the reality, not the fantasy. Yeah?
And was it easy to work with him?
Very, very. And in fact, I'm hoping that maybe we'll do another film very soon.
And has Alien turned out as you imagined?
Yeah, I mean, you always aim for the alien or the film. The alien.
The monster.
The monster. We shouldn't call him a monster, he's better than that. So I think that's the first answer, that he's better than a monster. He's far more primal and far more frightening and far more realistic, in a sense, than the idea of the monster. And so I think, yes, he's turned out very well. Okay. Better than I thought.
Thank you.
My suggestions for the adult Alien was generally approved by everyone. The task of designing an elegant insectoid being that has nothing in common with the usual clumsy film monsters was solved. But we came to the conclusion that a creature without eyes, driven by instinct alone, would be far more frightening. That's why I painted a second version of the alien, which has no eyes. It's a lot easier to put down a fantasy in a painting than to translate such a creation into a costume that can be worn by a man. We realized this while constructing the alien's head. Now and then, our creation, it's a conglomeration of plasticine, technical parts, and a skull, is subjected to a very critical appraisal. We're constantly feeling the pressure of losing time. It has to be finished by such and such a deadline, and this often turns the problematic construction process into a nightmare. Finally, we've solved the technical problem. The rubber mold of the alien's head is lying ready for casting in the plaster shop. The mold is filled out with bits of fiberglass matting and then daubed with polyester soaked brushes according to form. The head, now it's finally dried, has to be peeled out very carefully to prevent the delicate elements from breaking off. 5 of these heads were made. I got to work every day at 8:30. My studio's in B stage. 2 wooden partitions soon became an attraction for my co-workers' friends and families. I modeled the alien costume on a plaster statue of the 7-foot-tall Nigerian Bulagi. It's laborious, intricate work to fit on layer after layer of plasticine, to add in tubes, cables, vertebrae of snakes, and so on, in order to finally see the biomechanical alien from my imagination standing in front of me. Beside its toothed, flickering tongue, this creature also ought to have a tail it could use as a weapon. For this, I am using an animal vertebrae which appears to be flexible enough. All these countless formal elements are needed to result in a really complete alien costume. In the monster manufacturing department, my co-workers are brushing layer after layer of fluid latex rubber into these molds day after day, so that they can finally extract the fruits of their work. These are the legs of the costume. For a perfect fit, a bit of artistic tailoring is called for. Now my job is to join together the different parts in terms of the structures and colors, so that the audience won't see a costume, but a convincing, realistic being. In another studio, Carlo Di Marchi is working on the facial musculature of the monster. Because the creature is able to perform real movements, these have to correspond optically to the facial muscles. For this work, we're using contraceptives. Carlo Rambaldi with his crew. Probably Rambaldi's most famous mechanization is King Kong in the new movie version. He was awarded an Oscar for the mechanization of that ape, and he also instilled life into our alien. The facial movements are controlled by hand through wires attached to a lever console. At last, the long-awaited first appearance of the alien on scene. During the shooting, concentration is always very intense. Scott is giving last instructions to the stuntmen. The acrobatic parts of the scenes are mainly played by a stuntman. And now, complete silence. Everyone present is watching events with great suspense. After the scene is shot and complete, everything gets torn down rather brutally and thrown away. You really have to be a seasoned professional to stand this sight without feeling some nostalgia. The next producer is already waiting at the door with his contract.